On your journey through life, you are the hero. There are times, however, when it is beneficial to have an advisor to guide you along your path. Welcome to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh, certified financial planner, certified investment management analyst, and co-founder of MP Advisors LLC. In this podcast, Brent discusses some of the most important and interesting topics of the day as they relate to finance, the economy, and beyond. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to Smart Money Simplified with Brent Mekosh. Brent, what's going on?
Eric, I'm doing something that I've never done in any of our podcasts together. I'm actually sitting here and drinking a glass of wine. It is Friday afternoon, and I figured, you know what? It's happy hour somewhere, right? So let's crack open a bottle of nice white wine and have a good conversation today. How you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. I do not have any wine. I did not know that there was that kind of party today. So
it is that kind of party because I have a really fantastic guest today. I've got Arden Montgomery with us, and she's a co-founder and head of marketing and sales for Argaux. Argaux is probably one of the great wine clubs that you can ever possibly see or participate in. She's a certified sommelier, and she's been the go-to person for both myself and my family whenever we want to go get great wine with a story. And we always know that she's got some great ideas and some great selections for us.
Oh, well, fantastic. I'm so glad that you brought her on the show today. I'm going to sit back and learn a lot about wine, I think.
I think so. I'm going to drink a little bit, which again,
Right.
Haven't done that. So Arden, this is a new one for me because in the past, Eric and I, we've dealt with conversations. We've had ex-convicts here. We've had police officers. We've had people talking about Silk Road in China. We've talked about inflation. We've talked about a lot of key economic things. And this one's going to be a lot of fun. Today, we are going to be talking about wine. And as you know, we've known each other for a while now, that my family were definitely wine enthusiasts. And as I know your family is as well. So thank you so much. I know you're really busy, and I really appreciate you taking some time out of your Friday afternoon to spend some time with Eric and I.
Thanks for having me, Brent. I know you strategically planned this for a Friday, right?
I absolutely did. Yes, I did. Because Friday, one of my favorite things to do is when I wrap up the day, I go home, we go into our wine fridge, and invariably there's several bottles there that your company has sent us. And it's my way to chill out and enjoy the beginning of the weekend anyway.
What are you drinking?
I have it. You sent this to me I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation.
I saw a Chablis. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's a Chablis. It is a Chablis. It's one of the ones that you sent, I guess, a few weeks or so ago. And it's delightful. It's very good.
Good. Well, cheers. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's talk wine. Like every industry is dynamic. And I guess I'll just start our conversation with what are some of the biggest changes that you have seen in the wine industry in the years now that you've been involved in it?
Yeah, how much time do we have? I think, I'll start with answering that question, in that we've been in business for almost 8 years, which is kind of crazy. 8 years in February. Margaux and I, my co-founder, laugh because we really feel like we haven't been in business that long. I mean, the first 3 years of the company are totally different in terms of the concept than what it is now. And we feel as though things really took off for us over the pandemic. So we were one of those businesses and concepts that gratefully, thankfully did very well because we sell wine and we ship nationwide. So as you probably participated in, that was a hobby that people did throughout quarantine and COVID, was drink wine. So we've been able to see kind of those changes as a really considering ourselves still a startup, in 2020 and even back in 2019, and just seeing all of the challenges that not just us in the wine industry, but the whole world has dealt with supply chain and climate change and all of that stuff. So I think, the long and the short of it is it's been very, very challenging with rising prices, shorter supply. And specifically in the wine industry, it's difficult because you find a wine that you like you're drinking a Chablis right now or white Burgundy or whatever it might be, and you can't just replace that with something else. So even though those products might be, in less supply or shorter supply, and they're, not getting to us as quickly as we need them, or we can't even access some of them, it's just an interesting concept because you just can't find something else to replace Chablis or to replace Burgundy,
That's a great point because you're right. All of these regions are so unique in what they deliver to to the wine drinker is so unique. So let's talk about supply chain issues. How obviously anyone that's had to get a house renovation or even build a house or buy an automobile, they've felt these supply chain issues firsthand. How has this impacted your business and the wine business around the world?
Yeah, we, certainly felt the impact pretty immediately, and like we're still feeling that today, and there's still problems that have yet to be resolved, and that goes across industries. In our business specifically, we have the most prominent thing that's still lingering for us is really just the increase in transportation costs and then shipping and packaging and things like that. I think, of course, it's been, like I was just saying, harder to access certain wines from certain regions. But in an interesting way, the way that our business concept has kind of evolved, like focusing on those smaller production, it's our job to uncover the hidden gems of the wine world and put those in front of consumers. I actually feel like we'll look back and say, it was extremely challenging, but it made us better storytellers. And from like a marketing perspective, we have to be able to, yes, source wine and give our consumers a variety of options when they're shopping on the website so that it's one that they're excited about and that they're going to enjoy. But it's also our jobs to like kind of hand sell the product. And it's been interesting to be like, yeah, it can be harder to access maybe some of these like larger production wines, but there is benefit to working with smaller producers in that they're a little bit more open to negotiating and to, making things work and getting creative. And then we have a little bit more variety in that way to say, okay, we can't get this Sancerre that we got last year, but there's this lesser known region just south of Sancerre and this newer up and coming producer that has the product available. And of course they're ready to move it,
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting just from that perspective, in that our angle has always been, we're not providing the well-known brand names that you find in your grocery store. Our whole model and why people come to Argaux is that they're trying to discover something new. So they're almost expecting that changing, like ever rotating selection, and don't always expect to come back and find the exact same thing.
Yeah. So what areas do you think the supply chain issues are? Is there supply chain issues? Obviously, you mentioned cost of transportation, obviously a huge one, but is there also supply chain issues just because, during the upheaval that we've had in the last couple of years, different producers, maybe did they put less acres under vine? Did they have a problem with as many businesses here have had with people, workers and things like that? Or is it really the distribution aspect that's been disrupted?
I mean, it's everything. It all trickles down, unfortunately, to the consumer. I mean, an example of just, exactly what's kind of happening, at least on the winery side. So like when we're seeing those delays or price increases, it's because these wineries are having the most trouble sourcing things like capsules or paper stock for labels, and really glass. I mean, glass is extremely difficult for anything being produced in Europe. So you're seeing both like a delay, maybe it's starting with, oh, they had a supplier that they've been working with for years, and now they can't get the paper stock that they usually get. They have to now go source a new vendor. And then, I think that I was like, I was reading something earlier this morning, and it made total sense to me, where there's been like this timeline shift, I feel like, for marketing and like product design. So thinking about like creating a wine label, right? Or like sourcing the materials that go into a bottle of wine. When like you used to work with the design team or the creative team to develop the new product or packaging, you could do it just like hypothetically in a month with your design team, and then send it to the manufacturer, and maybe it'd be delivered in like a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks. And now it's at least like double or triple the time. So like everyone's teams are just affected. And like, if you don't have those relationships in place with your suppliers, like they're not helping you out, and like they're trying to run their business, and it all just kind of trickles down. So yes, I mean, across from just even producing the bottles, labor in the vineyards for sure, and then all the way to, getting the wine actually to be delivered. We're feeling all of that.
Now, a lot of your relationships, and I see it, at least my wife follows you on our Instagram. you're into some pretty remarkable, beautiful places around the world, particularly over in Europe. How has all of the events over in Europe lately, have you heard anything about some of the energy disruptions, of course, what's happening with Russia, Ukraine? Has that had any impact at all in Italy and France and Spain and Germany and any of these other areas where you're sourcing wine?
Yeah, so we haven't really heard much aside from talking. I think the most impact that we've heard about from our producers and the wines that we import from are coming from Italy. And we have had some producers, that say that they're actually taking in refugees and stuff like that. But the attitude is generally they're doing what they have to do. So
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier that obviously COVID was a good time for your business because there were a lot more people at home. And let's be honest, a lot of people were drinking a little bit more wine. Was there a change in people's tastes or in the demographic of your client? Or what was sort of the biggest surprise that you got out of that in terms of the people that you were doing business with, your consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been very intrigued by that. We've certainly been looking into, our analytics and data to try to understand that consumer during that time, because our customer base grew significantly over, 2020 and into 2022 now, and trying to learn about those consumers because it was, vast and it was all over the board. And I think it just was like such a unique time that we struggle with like what to take away from that data. But in terms of the consumer trends, I guess people were looking for experience. Our blind tasting kit, which I know you recently enjoyed, I think was our best seller, and it still is. So people were maybe, less concerned about drinking the most expensive wine, but were interested in a story, and like prefer to drink better wine or drinking better quality wine. And maybe I think like now is the post-pandemic, like you saw a lot of wine consumption in 2020, and now it's trending towards this like quality, very health conscious. I get targeted, and I don't know if anyone here does too, but like that low alcohol trend or even no alcohol trend is something that is very apparent for us like right now. Is just understanding like the shift of all of this consumption during 2020, right? And then like this kind of total backlash of people reevaluating their wine consumption and how they're consuming alcohol.
So give me an idea. How much did the low or no alcohol wine drinker, how much did that increase? Was that a dramatic increase, or is it just something you're starting to see?
Yeah, I'm not sure like specific data points on it. We just know that we are seeing advertising and marketing towards it. And I'm specifically talking about all over for me, like my social media and Instagram. And we see that with even certain brands coming out with, this is the new like zero proof beverage of choice. I saw a little bit, I feel like the beginning of this year or last year, even like bars that were opening up. I feel like it was the East Coast that were for non-alcohol like cocktails or mocktails and things like that. So I don't know where it's going to go, to be honest, Brent. And of course, I'm thinking like it's our job to educate the consumer and say, hey, nothing wrong with if you're choosing to not drink alcohol, but the reasoning behind it being, for us, it's never been about drinking to get drunk or finding the highest alcohol wine or whatever it might be. We're trying to source the best wines that are good and good for you, and that they do have lower amounts of additives or chemicals. They tend to be lower in alcohol because these producers are making them to be enjoyed with food and at the dinner table and as a social setting. And just that whole kind of motto about how does wine show up for you in your life, it's just kind of this like mindset shift. So for us, we're never going to get behind that movement.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's interesting to see.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is remarkable about wine, and one of the reasons I like enjoying it, is that you can have the same bottle of wine from the same producer from the same region, and a year later it's completely different. Not just the harvest, but the actual wine itself. It ages, it changes over time. And what you find is the same grape, whether it's a New World wine, or it's grown over in Europe or something like that, can taste radically different. So let's talk about what are some of the really exciting regions that are on the map right now? Because that's one of the things that I know that my family's always appreciated about you is you do go out and find those wines. You find the wines that we're not going to see when we go into our, our local grocery store or wine store here. So is there any place that around the globe that you're really excited about?
Oh yeah. Like you just said, I mean, we're excited and we're fortunate that we can get exposure to these wines directly. You know, we got our import license, gosh, I think it was back in 2018. So, that's a value prop for us, in that we are meeting with these families directly. We're getting to know their story, tell their story. Specific wine that is very relevant for us right now that just arrived is from Ischia, so out of Italy. This wine is a Bianco Lella. I don't know, Brent, if you've heard of that grape variety before.
I have not, no.
But that's just one example of, these areas, and that's specifically in Italy. It's a volcanic island, actually, and it's just kind of like that wine just tastes like the waters of the sea right there. It's like near the water. It's an indigenous grape. So I think when we're talking about like these lesser known regions, there's so much to be said for all of these grape varieties that you might have never heard of, that don't really show up in the US a lot. Like, it's really hard. I had never had that wine before. And Lexi, our one of our co-founders now, she manages all of the imports for the import side of the company. And she just happened to be there for her honeymoon and tasted the wine and kind of was like, she was seeking it out because she had heard about it. And we luckily were able to bring it over now 2 years later, #supply chain.
Sure.
But it's finally here. So just kind of going off of that, I think specific regions, I mean, Italy, right? So like anywhere throughout Italy, there's all of these lesser known areas that are just, outside of Tuscany, outside of even like the Piedmont area, like these regions that we're just familiar with for like the Barolo and the Sangiovese and things like that. Italy is going to be forever an entire lifetime. You could never explore everything that they have to offer. But I think also Spain, I've been saying that not just recently, but still Spain is a great area to discover a variety of wines at an amazing, affordable price point. And they have a little bit of something for everybody. I think one more region that I'll just touch on now would be South Africa, which I know I said that without actually thinking that I'm talking to you.
Yes, we can tell that story for sure, but yes.
South Africa, we have that project that we did with Chase Carhart of Carhart Family Wines called Argaux. And actually I would credit him to say that he's really shown us and educated our entire team on, how much of an underrated wine region South Africa is, and, how much potential there is coming out of there, and just the culture and the people. And those two wines, that Syrah and that Pinot, are some of my favorites. So long and the short, there's just so much wine out there. And that's what excites us and what keeps us going, is just being able to, help our consumers discover those lesser known regions.
So the backstory to that South Africa comment is I've been down there a few times and I've got some friends in the wine industry down there. And I'm always calling Arden saying, can you get me this? Can you get me this? And it's usually something that's kind of obscure from South Africa. And she's always been able to come through. So that's been great. Now, another question. So you mentioned a lot of these producers. Is the wine world, and I don't know the answer to this, is it made up primarily of small mom and pop type operations, or is it becoming increasingly large and corporate?
It's vast in this kind of mass produced commercial brands. And I'm not sure how to answer that, because I think about it from the consumer perspective, right? Like what they're exposed to and what they see. I think that they're, again, kind of going back to what I just said, but what motivates us is that there is so much wine out there that's not getting imported, So it's kind of like just thinking about it from the consumer of like, what do they see on the shelves? And you think about how many cases those larger wineries have to be producing to be able to distribute and to supply to all these grocery stores and things like that. And I think just kind of a data point there for perspective, there's a winery, I won't name any names, but a winery out of, I think it's Northern California, that produces, a total amount of cases that's greater than like the entire state of Oregon produces out of all of their wineries. Like that to me is like, we are talking about two totally separate things, mass produced commercial product versus an agricultural product, where like the majority of the wines that we're sourcing, that we're working with, we say that small production means like under 25,000 cases, but like the majority of the wines that we have are actually under like 10,000 cases, So just like that just puts things in perspective. So not really a direct answer to your question, but it's just, to me, I just immediately thought of like, as a US consumer, like what do they think about the wine world? Like it seems probably smaller to them because they're only exposed to so much,
Sure. Well, I remember this is now in 2011, I was in the South Island of New Zealand. There's a small region there, the Otago Valley. They do some phenomenal Pinot Noirs, and they were so good. And I had asked a lot of these growers, I said, why can't I get this in the United States? And they're saying, because we have 15 acres under vine,
Yeah,
and there's no way they can it's not cost effective for them to get it here.
Yeah.
And then even if they can get it to the United States, now they've got to deal with 50 different states. So it's like, how difficult is it being in your business, distributing across 50 states, where every state has its own set of unique laws around your product?
Yeah, I would say, aside from, how we started the conversation just with kind of every day being different with supply chain and just climate change and, all of that, and then just running a company, right? I would say that one of the hardest aspects of being in our industry, and if we're being candid, one of the things where I'm like, where's like, there's all this gray area with compliance. And it certainly is like one of the most challenging aspects of running a wine business. I mean, we only are distributing like that product to restaurants and hotels and country clubs and things like that throughout California. But like I said at the beginning, we are shipping our product nationwide to most states. There are some states that we can't ship to. But it's challenging for a small business, but I think that what we've learned, again, we grew during the pandemic. We were exposed to a lot more states, a lot more new customers, that we were like, are we investing in this state? And by investing, I mean, are we going to go through and try to get compliant there? It really just comes down to like looking at the opportunity for us and like weighing the pros and cons of like, how much is it going to cost us to not only get compliant in a certain state, but then also have to report taxes in that state, and what kind of personnel do we need, and like, is it worth it?
Sure.
And I'd say that like our top 5 states are pretty much, I think the top 5 states for most retailers are the same. It's California, it's New York, it's Illinois, Florida, Texas.
Right.
So it's pretty standard.
What do you, in your business, and because again, it's a unique set of compliance guidelines you have to get around, is there a state that is the absolute best to work with and one that's more challenging?
I mean, I'd say for us, just,
California probably,
just because we're here. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The most challenging has been, I mean, I just thought of Michigan because we were able to ship there when we first launched, and they recently changed some laws and regulations, so we can't ship there anymore.
So that's interesting, some of the different issues you have working state by state. Now, one of the things I've read quite a bit about, and I've had, clients and friends of mine that are wine drinkers have sent me a number of stories as well, talking about possible impacts of climate change on growing grapes and what that means for the future of the wine industry. Is that something that is a real situation that people are dealing with moving forward? And if it is, how so? How are they dealing with it?
Oh yeah. And to your point, I feel like I see a new article about specifically California and climate change, almost like weekly now. It's interesting because you think about a place like California and, they're producing premier red and white wines, and they're really being hit with everything from this like excessive heat to drought. And I know that they had I think they were experiencing some deep freezes earlier this year. And so it's just kind of like a waiting game to see what happens. But I think that a lot of people are resorting to sustainability when it comes to that and just trying to problem solve and figure out like what they can do. I think what we see outside of California, wines, I think about also a place like Burgundy and Chablis, where Chablis is historically a very, very cold wine growing region. And just in the recent vintages, you've just started to see those wines change. And so it's kind of this question of like a place like California, is it actually going to be, which it feels that way, like devastating to that region where like, can they continue, versus a place like Burgundy or Chablis, where you're just starting to see like warmer growing seasons and the wines are changing. So like devastation versus the Chablis we knew a decade ago is just going to continue to change, and it's going to be a totally different wine.
And in a warmer climate, because I'm actually drinking a glass of Chablis right now.
Yeah.
In a warmer climate, how does that impact the taste?
So take Chablis, for example, just very, I'll break it down and the easiest way to understand it would just be the quality or the condition of the fruit. So I just think about, I actually visited Chablis for the very first time back in 2016 with Margaux. And I'll never forget, we were there during, I think based on the winemaker's memory, it was the worst hailstorm they'd ever experienced in the past like 30 years. Okay. So like horrible weather. The hail was so bad that, you actually couldn't produce wine that year. And then, it takes, 3 to 4 years for those vines to be able to produce grapes again. But so that's the Chablis that I know that creates the wines that I love. Because like it's these horrible conditions and the vine is struggling and they're just have this like austere acidity. And it's just you can't make a wine like that anywhere else. It's so specific and to that region. And as that area gets warmer, you're losing more or less that acidity. So the acidity meaning like you take that sip and your mouth is watering. It's like you're biting into a lemon, versus biting into a lemon meringue pie.
Sure.
So it's like that condition of fruit just becomes more of that, it goes from Granny Smith apple, super tart, super acidic, to a red apple that's been sitting on the counter for 2 weeks. Like, it's just like, that's how it's going to end up changing. And so, as I'm just kind of talking out loud, I do think it's an interesting topic because it feels very devastating to California, where it's kind of like, at what point can they even continue to produce like these premier red wines, versus like the rate at which climate's changing over in France. And like, are we just going to have to get used to a different style of wine versus them actually not being able to produce wine?
Sure. Yeah, that is a big difference. Have you heard from your producers over in Europe? Because obviously, we're watching the news and you're seeing major river systems in Europe at historic lows. World War II vessels that have been underwater for decades now are coming out from under the water. What kind of season has it been in Europe? Are these kind of dry, hot conditions? Is it serve them, or is it kind of really depends on where you are in the continent?
Yeah, I think it depends, and it's just been fluctuating. I haven't heard anything extremely negative this year. I feel like in the past couple of years, it's just been like hit after hit of whether it's that frost or that hail. So I'll be curious to see, what kind of news comes out as we continue to move forward with the 2022 harvest.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I've also read as well is that what you're finding is there's a lot more northerly climates that suddenly now become pretty good growing regions. And I remember this is now back in 2014. I was outside of Vancouver, and I might butcher the pronunciation, but I think it was the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia.
Okay.
And shockingly, amazingly great wines. And again, we don't get them here in the United States generally because they're not very big producers. But my understanding was at the time it was the most northerly wine region in the world. Are there more regions like that are opening up, or where people are planting grapes where they never did in the past?
I think definitely the answer would be yes. I'm thinking specifically of my interest specifically because I actually was just there. I was in England, but you think about I always get asked, like, do they make wine there? And they actually do. They make sparkling wine. And that's kind of an area that I've been interested to watch. I don't have any specifics on regions that I've necessarily seen or come across that are, making significant moves, but it's something that we're certainly going to be keeping an eye on, because that's definitely part of this conversation.
Sure. Now, we've talked about Europe, we've mentioned South Africa, and of course the United States. But again, there's a world of wine out there. So what's your feeling on what's happening down South America, Chile, Argentina, Australia? Tell me about some of those Southern Hemisphere wines. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. We have wine that we import from Mendoza. It's a Malbec. You've been to Argentina, haven't you, Brent?
We were down in Chile, my wife and I were, and that was back in 2018. And of course, when we got back, we gave you like a laundry list of Chilean wine that we.
Yes. Okay. I was like, I feel like I remember us talking about this area. Yeah. I have not been to Chile, but I've been to Argentina, and I think I'm actually, just now that we're talking about this, I'm going to bring this back to the team. But when I was there, it's so interesting because I actually didn't taste any Malbec.
Okay.
Which is so much like what we're used to seeing here. I went to, all these different wine bars, and I spent a lot of my time down in the Patagonia area, but you're tasting these, varieties that you just don't see here. I think about like Bonarda specifically as one of them that I just fell in love with, or even talking about Pinot, that Bodega Chacra wine. I mean, that's being grown in Patagonia because they can grow it there because it's colder. But Argentina is a region that I get so excited about, and that I think I'm happy that we're finally importing a wine. And although it's Malbec, like, looking forward to exploring what else we're able to bring back, because I do think, like, I don't even know if the US consumer would know any other like grape varieties aside from Malbec, because they export all of it. So that's definitely a region that I'm excited about. Margaux went to Chile for her honeymoon, and I know, like, same experience. There's grape varieties over there as well that we just don't see here. And then I personally have not been to New Zealand. That's on my bucket list, but just like you, those Central Otago Pinots, are some of my favorites. So definitely want to explore that. And then same thing, Australia. Do you drink a lot of Riesling, Brent? I forget if you guys explore Riesling at all. I don't think.
Yeah, we tend to like we're not sweet wine people, my wife and I. And I've had really dry Riesling in the past that I've thought's pretty good, but it's not going to be first on my list. Every time I kind of try to expand my palate to a Riesling, I kind of regret it. It's just not, it just doesn't speak to me.
I know. Well, I was thinking about Riesling out of Australia, because I feel like they do produce a lot of dry Rieslings. And they've just become some of our favorite food wines. So thinking about, like, being a very food friendly wine for a variety of different cuisines. But I will say that Australia and New Zealand are probably two of the regions that we have historically had just less variety from. I don't have an exact reason why, but I would say that I would first go to Argentina and make that a priority to try and bring back some of those more, lesser known grape varieties.
Sure. Now, last question I have for you is this. So I think that one of the reasons, at least, that I know I enjoy drinking wine is it can take me back to a really incredible experience that I had. Mm-hmm. So tell me, what was your greatest experience or favorite bottle of wine that you will never forget?
Oh my gosh. This is one of those questions I wish you would have sent me. So
I told you we're going to keep the conversation going.
What comes to mind first? I have been very fortunate with my dad's love for wine, and that's really how I was introduced to wine, right? To be able to explore his collection. And, I always laugh because when I started studying wine, like, he was drinking all Napa Valley Cabernet. And then I started coming home and bringing, bottles of Chablis and bottles of Merceau and, even like the Bourgogne Blancs and those entry-level Burgundy wines. And it just was like a switch was flipped, and he didn't touch those Napa Cabs like at all. And so it's been really fun thing for my family to go back into, the wines that he has that now have been aged properly and open them up. And so my point is that I've had a lot of really great older aged Napa Valley Cabernet, and they're super fun to drink. And it's not something that I drink at all, like regular, on a regular basis. I personally love old wine. And I think to your point about like how wine's all about experiences and like, the memories that can be made over at the table and who you're drinking it with, and to open an old bottle of wine and just see how, and just think about how much it's evolved over, 20 plus years. And just the fact that some of them can still have this amazing fruit on them. And that to me is just like remarkable. And that's when I get like my wine bug back, like I drink my, my go-to wines throughout the week, but it's those moments when you're pulling the cork on an older bottle, birthier bottles, things like that, where it's just like, it's almost like meditative. Like you're forced to just sit back and just enjoy. So, but specifically that's not a Napa Cab, but he had a lot of Sassicaia too. So we've been able to enjoy some of those older, I think he had one of my birthier 92. So that's always been fun. And those just hold meaning because they're his. And that's kind of brings it full circle just to what wine is all about, it's kind of, you're able to think back on who you've been able to share it with, and think back on like, when he was purchasing that wine and who he was with. And it's just been sitting there for years. So we always have a good story to tell.
We're waiting for the right moment to be opened and enjoyed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Arden, again, I can't thank you enough. I think that's a great way to end our conversation, because ultimately the wine is fantastic, but it's more about the people that you're drinking it with. And I really appreciate you taking some time out of your afternoon and speaking with me while I'm enjoying a nice glass of Chablis.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for thinking of me and having me on. A really great conversation, and enjoy the rest of that bottle this afternoon.
Definitely will. And thanks again, Arden.
See ya.
Arden, this has been fantastic. Brent, thank you so much for bringing her on the show. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Arden, I do have a question. I know right now, and this is just got to be a really tough part of your team's job, but from what I understand, kind of flights and travel and things to Europe are on sale right now. So is this an opportunity for you guys to go explore more?
Yeah. So the girls, like Brent said at the beginning, I do most of our marketing and oversee our sales, but Margaux, my co-founder, and Lexi, who helped us launch, it's Omlier Imports. That's the import arm of our company. They usually take about at least 2 trips a year, and it's mostly to trade shows. So, there's Vin Italy, that's usually out of Verona, Provine in Germany. And then they'll go and kind of tag on vineyard and producer visits on those trips. And they're typically in like the springtime. So I'm sure that they'll be looking for time to schedule those for next year. But maybe we'll take some personal trips over to wine country too.
There you go.
And before we end this, actually, I'm sitting here. My wife, who has never joined me for recording a podcast, has come in today, and she's the one that brought the bottle of wine with her. And she actually asked to say something. I don't know what, because she's just pantomiming over to me. So I'm gonna let her come in.
Hi, Arden. It's Paige.
Hi, Paige.
So good to talk to you. So I decided to share that I have the honor of serving as chair of the Department of Development for Mayo Clinic, and Arden's father was my absolute favorite benefactor that I've ever worked with. And I remember the first time I sat down with your parents and I was asking them about their children, and they mentioned your brother and they mentioned you, and that your name is Arden. And I was like, that is such a beautiful name. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I ever have a daughter, I'm going to name her Arden. And what do you know, 10 years later, had a daughter and her name is Arden. So for Brent's clients that know our children and know that we have an almost 2-year-old named Arden, it is in fact because I met Arden Montgomery and fell in love with her name. Anyway, and we can only hope that she is as smart and happy and business savvy and funny and beautiful as you are. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on here and for all the amazing wine over the years.
I hope your little Arden likes her name as much as I've liked it over the years.
Yeah, well, now she can't say Arden. She just says Artie, but it's cute.
Oh, really?
So,
Yeah, I couldn't pronounce my R's, so I always said Arden.
Arden. Oh, that's cute. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. That was so sweet.
Yeah, thanks again, Arden. We really appreciate it, and great talking to you.
You too, Brent. Thank you.
Arden, it's definitely our wish that our daughter becomes very much like you. Now, to those that have listened to this podcast and everything you shared with us, how do they find you?
Great question. So we are all online. Argaux.com, ARGAUX.com is where you can find our products and services and all of the fun wines that we discussed today.
And now, who is your ideal client? Who's the ideal customer that you want connecting with you?
I would say anyone who is open-minded and excited to discover new wines that they wouldn't otherwise be able to come across at their grocery store.
Wonderful. I know you can absolutely provide that because we've enjoyed several of them over the years. So again, happy Friday to you. And thank you again for spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thanks, Brent.
Arden, I just echo that. Thank you so much for your time. Brent, thank you for facilitating this. And of course, our last thank you goes to the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Smart Money Simplified podcast with Brent Mekosh. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Brent comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at MP Advisors, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Smart Money Simplified Podcast. Have any questions about topics covered during the show? Visit www.smartmoneysimplified.com or give us a call at 602-255-0555. Don't forget to click the follow button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors Incorporated, MP Advisors LLC, is not a broker/dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.